The night should have been ordinary. A modest restaurant. A man in a plain suit. No cameras, no reporters, no signs of the fortune he carried in his name. He thought he was invisible. But as he raised his glass, the black waitress slid a folded note onto his table, her hands steady, her eyes unreadable. For a moment, the millionaire froze. It wasn't just the paper that unsettled him. It was the way she looked at him, like she already knew his secrets, like she had been waiting for this moment all her life. He unfolded it under the dim light. Just one line, one sentence that made his chest tighten and his mind spiral. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't admiration. It was a threat. He glanced up, but she was already walking away, her back straight, her steps deliberate. Something in him told him this was no coincidence. This wasn't a chance. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous than he could imagine. To strangers, he was Daniel Connor, a name that carried weight, privilege, and whispers of power in every boardroom. To his investors, he was a genius strategist, a man who could turn rust into gold and collapse competitors with a single signature. But beneath the polished exterior, beneath the carefully calculated image that had been sculpted by years of relentless ambition, Daniel was a man hollowed out by secrets. He lived in two worlds. In one, he was the face on the cover of Forbes, a figure who moved with quiet dominance at galas and fundraisers, the kind of man whose handshake could seal futures. In the other, he craved invisibility, late-night drives in unmarked cars, meals in rundown diners where nobody cared who he was, nights in anonymous hotel rooms where no one asked about his fortune. For Daniel, anonymity wasn't just a luxury, it was oxygen. He carried ghosts with him, deals that had ended lives, contracts that had stripped families of their homes, decisions made in boardrooms that echoed in the broken cries of people he never met. He had long told himself it was business, that someone had to make the hard choices. But as the years stretched on, those justifications crumbled. The money piled higher, but so did the guilt. And guilt, unlike wealth, couldn't be silenced. That's why he went undercover. To feel human again. To be a man who could sit in a restaurant without anyone bowing, without cameras clicking. A man who could listen, observe, even pretend for a few hours that he wasn't carrying the weight of empires on his back. And yet, across the room, someone was watching. Her name was Maya Freeman. To the world around her, she was another invisible waitress in a crisp uniform, moving with quiet efficiency, tray balanced with the grace of habit. Guests didn't notice her, not really. They noticed their plates, their glasses, the conversations that consumed their lives. But Maya noticed everything. She had trained herself too. Her eyes were sharp, not the eyes of someone resigned to servitude, but of someone who had memorized every detail, every slip of a tongue, every hint of a truth people tried to hide. She wasn't just serving meals, she was studying, calculating, waiting. Because Maya wasn't just a waitress, she was a survivor of Daniel Connor's empire. Years ago, her father had worked at one of his factories, a loyal, hardworking man who believed that sweat and perseverance built futures. Then came the merger. Connor Enterprises had swallowed the company whole, and with a few strokes of a pen, hundreds were left jobless. Her father was one of them. At first, he tried to find new work, but opportunities dried up. Savings bled away. Stress turned to despair. Alcohol became a companion. And one night, despair won. Maya was 17 when she found him in the garage, the air thick with the finality of his choice. From that moment, her life was split in two. Before Connor Enterprises and after. Her mother never recovered. The home that once held laughter became a place of silence and grief. Bills piled up, doors closed, and Maya, bright, ambitious, and hungry for education, was forced to abandon dreams of college to work endless shifts. She carried trays instead of textbooks, wiped tables instead of writing essays, because survival left no room for luxury. But she never forgot. She never forgave. And so when the man in the plain suit walked in, glasses disguising eyes she had memorized from business magazine covers, she felt her blood turn to ice. Daniel Connor thought himself invisible tonight, but Maya had seen him. And worse, she remembered. Her heart didn't pound with fear. It burned with rage, a fury sharpened over years of grief. Her hands were steady, her movements calm, but inside she was a storm. She knew what she had to do. The folded note in her pocket wasn't written in haste. She had prepared it long ago, carrying it like a weapon, waiting for the day fate would deliver him within reach. And tonight, fate had delivered. Daniel didn't yet know that the quiet waitress studying him wasn't serving him out of duty. She was serving him his reckoning. But as Maya's eyes lingered on him on the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching, in the faint shadow of regret in his expression, something unsettled her. He didn't look like the untouchable titan from the magazines. He looked tired, haunted, maybe even broken. Could it be an act? Could it be manipulation? Or was there more to the man than the monster she had built in her memory? One thing was certain. The note in her pocket would force the truth out of him, one way or another. The restaurant was alive with murmurs, the soft clink of cutlery, the muted laughter of businessmen drunk on their own success, the faint hiss of wine being poured into crystal glasses. It was the kind of soundscape Daniel Connor had grown accustomed to in high society, though tonight he sought none of it. He sat in the corner booth, dressed down, his suit plain, his posture guarded. For a moment, he thought he had managed that precious invisibility he so often craved. The servers moved quickly but impersonally, treating him as just another patron. He had buried his name beneath anonymity. But Maya Freeman knew exactly who he was. She carried his plate like any other, her steps measured, her face carefully blank. But her heart was a drumbeat of rage in her chest, pounding with every step toward him. She could feel the weight of the folded slip of paper in her apron pocket. Her father's ghost whispered with every breath, "Do not falter. Do not forgive." When she reached his table, she placed the dish in front of him with the same quiet grace she had practiced for years. To Daniel, it was an ordinary moment, another anonymous waitress tending to him on another nameless night. He nodded politely, offering a muttered thank you. But Maya didn't move. Instead, she slipped the folded note beneath the edge of his plate, her fingers brushing the porcelain just long enough for him to notice. "For you," she said softly, her tone unreadable, almost casual. And then she was gone, moving swiftly between tables as though nothing had happened. At first, Daniel thought it was a receipt, perhaps an order mistake, but when he unfolded the paper, his blood chilled. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, as though every stroke was cut into the page with intention. "I know who you are, I know what you did. This is not over." For a moment, the bustling restaurant dissolved into silence. The words on the page blurred as Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. A chill ran through him, the kind of fear that money could not buy away. He looked around, scanning the room. No cameras, no paparazzi, no threats in suits, just diners eating, laughing, living. But someone knew. His gaze darted to the servers. Their uniforms blurred together, white shirts, black aprons, hair tied back. And then his eyes fell on her, Maya. The waitress with eyes too sharp for someone in her station, movements too precise, gaze too steady. She didn't look at him directly, but something about her stillness, her control, made his suspicion coil like a snake. Daniel folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. His instincts screamed for caution. He had spent his life dismantling threats, sniffing out betrayals before they surfaced. He knew the look of vengeance when he saw it. But this was different. It was personal. He could have called his driver, his security detail, or his lawyers, but for reasons he couldn't name, he didn't. Instead, he watched her. Maya moved with the efficiency of someone who knew her place or pretended to. She poured water at a nearby table, refilled bread baskets, and cleared plates. To anyone else, she was invisible. But to him, she was suddenly the only person in the room who mattered. And beneath his fear, something else stirred. Recognition. Not of her face he couldn't place her, but of her eyes. Eyes that held him accountable. Eyes that did not bow. He hated how that unsettled him. Across the room, Maya's pulse raced. She had seen the moment his expression shifted, the flicker of panic he tried to hide. She had pierced the armor of Daniel Connor, and it thrilled her. For the first time in years, she felt power shifting back into her hands. Yet doubt whispered at the edges of her fury. She had expected arrogance, denial, maybe even mockery. But instead, she had seen real fear, the kind that cracked through his polished facade and revealed something raw underneath. Could it be that the man who had destroyed her family was not the unshakable titan she had imagined, but a man already breaking under his own guilt? No. She crushed the thought before it could take root. Guilt did not erase what he had done. Regret won't resurrect her father. Tonight was only the beginning. Maya slipped into the kitchen, her breath sharp, her hands trembling with adrenaline. She had fired her first shot. The war had begun, and Daniel Connor, billionaire, empire builder, destroyer of lives, was no longer untouchable. Daniel didn't finish his meal. He couldn't. The food sat in front of him untouched, while his mind circled the note like a predator stalking prey. The words echoed in his skull. I know who you are. I know what you did. This is not over. He was a man used to pulling strings, never having them pulled on him. Yet here he was, sitting in a dimly lit restaurant, his pulse hammering like he was the hunted, not the hunter. He had thought anonymity was his shield. Tonight it had been pierced. His eyes tracked her every movement. Maya avoided looking at him now, but he could see the deliberate calm in her stride, the measured grace with which she refilled glasses and carried trays. It wasn't the submissive obedience of a waitress desperate for tips, it was something else. When she finally passed near his table again, Daniel seized the moment. You, he said sharply. Maya froze. The word was not loud, but it carried weight, authority, and an invisible tether pulling her back toward him. Slowly she turned her head. Her eyes met his, unflinching, dark and steady. Yes, sir? She replied, her voice even, polite, but with a razor's edge hidden beneath. Daniel leaned forward, his tone low enough to keep their conversation private. What is this? He tapped his pocket, where the note rested like a live grenade. Maya's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. A message, she said simply. I don't take kindly to threats. His voice was steady, but his knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. Neither did my father, Maya answered, the words slipping out like venom, deliberate and slow. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked. His eyes narrowed, confusion flashing before he masked it again with cold detachment. But Maya had seen the flicker of recognition, the fracture in his composure. She had hit her mark. She leaned closer, placing her hand on the edge of his table, as though to steady herself. But her presence was an act of defiance. To anyone watching, she was just a waitress addressing a customer. To Daniel, she was a storm pressing in. You ruined lives, she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. You think people forget. You think money buries blood, but some debts don't go away. Daniel inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He couldn't afford to lose control here, not in public. He was a man of strategy, not impulse. He forced his lips into something resembling a smile. Careful, he murmured. You don't know who you're playing with. Maya's eyes hardened. No, Mr. Connor, she said, and for the first time she used his name. It's you who doesn't know. The words landed like a strike. His name dragged into the open where it shouldn't have been known. His cover was slipping, unraveling with every second she stood there. Daniel forced himself to lean back, his posture casual, though every nerve in his body screamed. He couldn't let this waitress, this black woman, see how deep she had already cut. You should be careful, he said at last, his voice silk hiding steel. Loose tongues have a way of causing accidents. Maya straightened, her hand leaving the table, her eyes never wavering. So do greedy men, she replied, and then she walked away, leaving him in the wreckage of her words. Daniel sat frozen, his jaw tight, his mind racing. He wanted to summon her back, to demand answers, and crush this rebellion before it grew. But a part of him, the part he rarely listened to, hesitated. Because deep down, beneath the fury, he knew this wasn't just a threat. It was the beginning of something he couldn't control, and control was the one thing he had always relied on. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the penthouse suite of his hotel, staring out over the glittering city lights. His dinner jacket was still draped over the arm of the chair, his tie discarded, but he hadn't moved in hours. The note, her voice, the way she had spoken his name, as if she'd been waiting years for that moment. He pulled out his phone and made the call. A man answered on the second ring, his tone clipped, efficient. Connor. Daniel didn't waste words. I need everything on a black waitress named Maya. She works at a small restaurant on 5th and Broad. Run it through every database, family, past addresses, debts, associates. I want it all. Tonight. There was a pause. Understood. He ended the call and leaned back. That was the answer. Information. He would tear her life apart on paper, dissect her until she was nothing but data and mistakes. That's how he had always handled threats. You didn't confront fire head on, you starved it of oxygen. Hours later, his phone buzzed. The file had arrived. He opened it, scrolling through records, photos, fragments of her life, and that was when he froze. Maya Brooks, age 28, waitress. Father, Leonard Brooks, former employee of Connor Industries. Terminated after whistleblowing on unsafe labor practices at one of the company's plants. Blacklisted from the industry. Financial ruin followed. Medical debt piled after a workplace accident. 2 years later, Leonard Brooks died of a heart attack, compounded by stress. Daniel's throat tightened. He remembered. Not Leonard's face, but the case file, the reports, the way it had been handled efficiently, clinically, like cleaning up a mess. He had signed off on it, convinced he was protecting the company, protecting himself. But on the screen staring back at him was not a file. It was the life he had crushed. A daughter left to scrape by, a family name dragged into ruin. For the first time in years, guilt pierced him. Not the vague guilt of numbers and profits, but something sharper, personal. Maya, he muttered under his breath. The next evening, Daniel returned to the restaurant. He shouldn't have. It was reckless, dangerous even. But he couldn't stay away. She noticed him immediately. Maya's eyes flickered to his table the second he walked in. There was no fear in her expression, only fire. "You came back," she said when she approached, pad in hand. Daniel looked up at her, searching for words that didn't sound like weakness. "You wanted me to." Maya tilted her head, studying him, as if weighing whether to laugh or spit in his face. "You think this is a game, Mr. Connor? That I slip you a note, you play detective, and we trade clever words until one of us blinks?" Her voice was sharp, but beneath it he heard something else. Pain, loss, rage that had been building for years. Daniel lowered his voice. "I know who your father was." The pad in her hand trembled, just slightly, but her eyes never left him. "You don't get to say his name," she whispered. "I remember what happened," he pressed, almost desperate now. "The plant, the reports, it wasn't what?" Maya cut in, her words like a blade. "Wasn't your signature on the order that destroyed him? Wasn't your silence that let him die branded as a liar?" Daniel flinched. The truth was brutal when spoken aloud. Maya leaned closer, her breath brushing his ear as she spoke low enough for only him. "You took my father's voice. Now I'll take yours. I'll make sure the world sees you the way I do, not as some untouchable king, but as a man with blood on his hands." She straightened, leaving him with the weight of her vow, and for a long moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. But what unsettled him most wasn't her threat. It was the flicker of heat in his chest when her words cut into him, the fire of recognition, of a woman whose fury was as fierce as her courage. He should have hated her. Instead, he couldn't look away. Daniel Connor had always been the man who controlled the boardroom, the markets, the room. But with Maya, control slipped through his fingers like water. Days after their heated exchange, he began noticing strange things. A journalist friend called to confirm rumors about his company. Anonymous emails hinting at scandals buried years ago. Financial movements in offshore accounts that only a handful of people could have known about. She was moving, and she was good. Maya wasn't just a waitress with a grudge. She was calculated, deliberate, and patient. She had used her job to listen, to watch, to gather whispers from men who thought she was invisible. She had pieced together a mosaic of his empire's sins. Now she was feeding it into the world, little by little, like drops of poison in a well. Daniel felt the walls closing in. In board meetings, partners eyed him with suspicion. On trading floors, rumors sparked panic. Even his most trusted advisors began to distance themselves. The empire he had built brick by ruthless brick trembled under her unseen hand. And at night, he found himself returning to that same small restaurant. Not because he was a fool, but because of her. Maya always saw him coming. She didn't smile, didn't soften, but there was something between them neither could deny. Some nights, their conversations barbed each word another dagger. Other nights, silence stretched between them, heavy, electric, neither willing to admit how the air seemed to thrum when they stood too close. But Maya never forgot. She carried her father's ghost in her eyes, and she reminded Daniel of it at every turn. One evening, he stayed after closing. The restaurant was empty, lights dimmed, chairs stacked. Maya leaned against the counter, arms folded, as he finally said what he hadn't been able to admit. "I signed the order," he whispered. Your father's file. I didn't look deeper. I didn't care what it did to him. And if I could take it back. Too late, Maya cut him off, her voice trembling with fury. Do you know how many nights I sat at our table, watching my mother cry, wondering why we didn't matter? You don't get to buy forgiveness with regret. Daniel stepped closer, eyes dark. Then why are you still talking to me? Why not destroy me outright? Her lips parted, but no answer came. The truth terrified her. Because as much as she hated him, some part of her wanted to understand him. Some part of her felt the weight of his words, his remorse, and the man beneath the empire. Maya shoved past him, her chest heaving. Because destruction has to be slow, brutal, and I want you to feel every second of it. She left him there, drowning in silence. That night, headlines broke. Leaked documents exposing one of Connor Industries' cover-ups. Stock prices plummeted. Allies turned to enemies. Maya had struck. Hard. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't sure he could survive it. But what frightened him more than ruin was the possibility that in trying to destroy him, Maya might be destroying herself too. The game had tipped, and love, if it was there at all, seemed destined to burn in the fire of revenge. The storm hit like thunder. Daniel's empire crumbled faster than the press could report it. Investigations opened. His company's stock bled red across the financial boards. Headlines called him everything from a fraud to a corporate butcher. The mighty Connor Industries was on the verge of collapse, and Maya should have felt triumphant. She had waited years for this moment for the name Connor to burn, for the man who signed away her father's dignity to finally taste the bitterness of powerlessness. She had delivered every strike with precision. Each leak, each whispered truth, each document slipped to the right hands. But instead of triumph, a strange hollowness gnawed at her. One night, she watched Daniel step into the restaurant again. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his hair disheveled. He looked nothing like the untouchable millionaire she had once despised. He looked like a man brought to his knees. Maya braced herself, arms crossed, ready to twist the knife deeper. But his eyes stopped her. There was no arrogance, no cold calculation, only exhaustion and something else she hadn't expected. A quiet, raw honesty. You were right, Daniel said softly, sliding into the corner booth. I ruined lives. I buried my conscience under numbers and contracts. But what's happening now is that it's bigger than me. Someone's feeding off this chaos, Maya. Someone who doesn't care about your father or justice. They'll take everything from me. My company, your restaurant, this whole community, and leave nothing standing. She stiffened. Lies, you'll say anything to save yourself. He leaned forward, voice low, urgent. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm telling you, if this keeps going, the people who hurt your father will walk away richer, and everyone else will pay the price, including you. For the first time, doubt pierced her armor. That night, unable to sleep, Maya found herself digging, cross-referencing the leaks, the names, the shell companies, and what she uncovered chilled her. Daniel wasn't lying. A shadow network had seized on her revenge, using her righteous war as a smokescreen for their own schemes. They were dismantling Connor Industries not for justice, but for profit. The same kind of greed that had destroyed her father was at work again, this time, bigger, colder, and more dangerous. Maya's chest tightened. Had she been a pawn in someone else's game all along? The next evening, she met Daniel outside the shuttered restaurant. For the first time, there was no venom in her voice. You knew, she whispered. I suspected, he said. But I need you to believe it yourself. I don't want your forgiveness, Maya. I just want to stop them before it's too late. Her hand trembled, torn between striking him and holding on. The man she swore to destroy was now the only ally she had left. Slowly, painfully, Maya made her choice. If we do this, she said, her voice sharp with warning, it's not because I trust you. It's because I won't let them win. A flicker of relief passed over his face. Not victory, just the fragile thread of hope. For the first time, enemies turned reluctant allies. The war wasn't over. It had only shifted. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ashes of hatred and betrayal, something dangerous sparked between them. Not forgiveness, but something that could grow into it if they survived. The night of reckoning came cloaked in rain. Daniel and Maya stood together, unlikely allies in the storm, as they entered the glass tower that once bore his name. Connor Industries. Headquarters, his kingdom was now crawling with the very men who had hijacked Maya's revenge for their own greed. Maya's pulse pounded. Every nerve screamed that this was madness, that she had no business standing beside the man she had sworn to destroy. But there was no turning back. If she didn't fight with him, they would both lose everything, and the people truly responsible for her father's ruin would walk away unscathed. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Board members, investors, and shadow figures in expensive suits clustered around sleek conference tables, plotting their final strike, stripping the company, selling its bones, pocketing billions. Daniel strode in first, his voice like steel. "You think you can gut my company and bury your sins under my name?" A smirk crossed one man's face, Harlan Stone, a rival executive Maya recognized from leaked documents. "Connor, you're finished. Your empire's already bleeding out. And thanks to the little whistleblower—" His eyes flicked toward Maya. "We barely had to lift a finger." Maya's blood boiled. They had used her pain, her vengeance as their tool. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "No, you used me. You used my father's death to cover your greed. But tonight, the truth comes out." She slammed a thick envelope onto the table. Inside were recordings, documents, contracts, proof she had been gathering ever since she realized the betrayal. Daniel had helped her track them, risking what little remained of his power to expose the rot. The room erupted. Some men shouted, others lunged for the files. But Daniel was ready. He had called in allies of his own government regulators, journalists, even law enforcement, waiting outside. The trap snapped shut. Stone sneered. "Do you think this changes anything? Connor, you're still ruined. And her?" He jabbed a finger toward Maya. "She'll always be the black waitress who thought she could play in a world too big for her." Maya stepped forward, eyes blazing. "No, I'm the black woman who burned your world down." The doors burst open. Agents flooded in, cuffing the corrupt executives. The tower shook with chaos, shouts, resistance, the collapse of power that had once seemed untouchable. In the eye of the storm, Daniel and Maya stood side by side. For Daniel, it was triumph but also surrender. He knew his empire would never be the same, but he didn't care anymore. For the first time in his life, he had fought not for money, not for pride, but for something that mattered. For Maya, it was vindication. Her father's ghost could finally rest. But it was also something she hadn't expected relief that Daniel had fought with her, not against her. When the last of the men were led out in cuffs, silence fell. The building, once a monument to arrogance, felt strangely hollow. Daniel turned to her, his voice rough. "It's over." Maya's chest tightened. She searched his face, looking for the man she had once hated. All she saw was a man stripped bare, flawed, repentant, human. "It's not over," she whispered. "Not for us." And for the first time, she didn't mean it as a threat. Weeks passed. The tower that once held Daniel's empire now stood under new management. The corrupt stripped of their power. Newspapers carried front-page stories of the scandal, hailing Maya's courage as the whistleblower who brought down a giant. For the first time in years, her father's name was mentioned not as a casualty of failure, but as the man whose suffering had exposed a system of greed. Maya sat at the little restaurant where it all began, staring out the window. The world had changed, but so had she. Revenge had been her fire, but love had been the water that kept it from consuming her whole. The bell above the door chimed. Daniel entered quietly, no longer the polished millionaire, but a man dressed simply, carrying no titles, no empire, only himself. "Thought I might find you here," he said softly, sliding into the booth across from her. Maya studied him for a long moment. "You've lost everything," she murmured. Daniel gave a small, wry smile. "Not everything. The money, the company, those were things I built out of fear. Fear of being small, fear of being forgotten. But what I found with you, what we fought for, that's real, and I'd rather lose the world than lose that." Her throat tightened. For so long, she had dreamed of destroying him, of watching him crawl, and she had succeeded. But sitting here now, all she felt was the weight of a choice. Keep holding on to hate or reach for something new. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I wanted you to hurt, and you did. But I never thought you'd change." He leaned forward, his hand resting on the table, open, waiting. "Maybe I didn't change. Maybe you just saw the part of me I kept buried." For a heartbeat, Maya hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. The touch was tentative, trembling, but it was a start. In that simple contact lay everything. The ashes of vengeance, the spark of forgiveness, and the fragile, powerful possibility of love. Outside, the city buzzed, uncaring, unknowing, but in that small booth, two broken people found the strength to begin again. Maya smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. You know, she said, if you really want to prove you've changed, you could help me rebuild what your company destroyed. Not just for me, for everyone. Daniel's lips curved into something warm, steady. Then that's what we'll do, together. The bell above the door chimed again as laughter and life poured into the restaurant. The world moved forward, and so did they. Because in the end, vengeance had led them to something neither expected, which is redemption, and a love strong enough to rise from the four ruins. In the ashes of pain, they uncovered love. In the shadow of betrayal, they found trust. And together, they proved that even the deepest scars can give birth to something beautiful. If this story touched you even for a moment, subscribe for more stories that pierce the heart and stir the soul.